I'm Roy Grimes, President of the National Archery in the Schools program. Welcome to this video series on how to be a lane official at a National Archery in the Schools program tournament. You're planning to work as a volunteer at a regional, state, national, or world National Archery in the Schools program tournament, and we want you to be successful. We want you to have a great time, and we want the kids to have an enjoyable experience. There'll be many segments covered during this video series on how to be that terrific lane official. This first segment of the video series will be how a National Archery in the Schools program range is laid out. Downrange, you'll see the arrow curtain. It's the backstop for the targets to catch any errant arrows. In front of the arrow curtain are the target butts with paper faces that the students will shoot at. As we move up the range, you'll see floor quivers on shooting lines, and you see bow racks where the students will hang their bows. We have lines taped on the floor as well. Here, where the students will wait, is called the waiting line. And then we move to a 15-meter shooting line, we have a 10-meter shooting line, and then we move to the target line, which is 6 feet from the targets, where students will wait while their lane mate pulls arrows from the target butt. Hi again, volunteer lane officials. During this segment, we're going to show you how to inspect the bows and the arrows to make sure that the tournament is fair for every archer. So student archers are now going to place their bows on the bow racks and their arrows in the quiver, and then go back behind the waiting line to wait further instructions. They must arrive to their lanes at least 15 minutes before their flight begins. Lane officials will first inspect the bows to make sure that they are allowed for use in the tournament. There's only one bow allowed to be used in the National Archery in the Schools program worldwide, and it is the standard Genesis bow. This red bow here is a standard legal bow for use in this program. I want to compare two other bows that you could show up from time to time that must be removed from the bow rack and can't be used. This is the standard Genesis. Notice there are no cutouts in the sight window area of the bow. This is the mini Genesis, which is disallowed for use in the National Archery in the Schools program. You can tell that it's a mini because it's much smaller. Axle to axle length is much shorter than the standard Genesis, and it has cutouts in the sight window area of the riser. You could also find a Genesis Pro on the bow rack, which is disallowed for use in NASP. The Genesis Pro is a much longer bow than the standard Genesis, and it too has cutouts in the sight window area of the riser. Those bows would have to be removed from the bow rack in the tournament. This is another standard Genesis bow, but you notice it has a custom paint job. We allow custom paint jobs for use in the tournaments as long as they haven't placed sight marks on this area of the sight window. It's also okay to use bows that have camouflage paint patterns on them as long as the face of the sight window is blacked out or covered with something such as tape so that the camouflage lines can't be used as sight marks. As we're inspecting the bow, we want to look at the knock locator. Here you see knock locators have been tied on with thread. There's two here, and this is allowed. You can either have one above the arrow or one above and one below the arrow as long as they are close to the arrow's knock. Occasionally you'll see a new bow on the rack that has the heat shrunk knock locator still in place. That's also allowed in the tournament. But if you come to a bow that has a brass knock locator, a metal knock locator on the string, that must be removed from this bow before it can be shot in NASP or this tournament. You want to also check every one of the bows and look at the face of the sight window, this area right here, to make sure there aren't any marks that could be used as sight references like we talked with the camouflage bow. For example, for the purpose of this video, I put some white tape in this area and put a couple of sight marks for 15 and 10 meters. Obviously, that wouldn't be allowed to use in the tournament. It'd have to come off and it'd have to be covered up. Generally, they won't be this obvious though. There'll be little scratches in the riser or little dots of paint or fingernail polish. If those are present, they must be covered with black tape or markers so that they can't be used by the archer. We also want to check the bow to make sure that there aren't any draw stops attached that would allow the string to be drawn back to a specific spot and stop, which would be an aid to the archer. A draw stop could be placed on the cable like this tape you see here, and when the bow is drawn, the tape hits the cable guard slide and stops. Or the draw stop could be attached to the cam like you see here, and as the cam rotates, it will stop at a specific draw length. Both of those are disallowed and would have to be removed from the bow before it could be used. You want to make sure that each bow has the standard allowed new Archery product arrow rest installed. It's a little flipper rest like this. The arm of the rest could have the Teflon sleeve attached, or if the sleeve is missing, that rest is still okay to use in the tournament. You notice the little build out, the springy part of the rest plate here, it must be in place. Sometimes an archer will cut those off to make this arrow rest smaller at this point. That must be in place for the rest to be legal. You may also find on the string an item called a no glove. It's been placed on the string to protect the archer's fingers. There isn't one on this string, but it would be a raised piece of rubber that protects the fingers there. You notice this bow has a wrist sling attached to it. It's bolted into the back of the riser. These are okay to use in NASP as well, as long as there is no long stabilizer out front holding it on. Some accessories are allowed to be used in a NASP tournament, such as an arm guard that Ethan's wearing, or a shooter's glove that Tyler is wearing, or a finger tab that Shelby is wearing. If a student wants to use a finger sling like you see here to help them keep control of the bow, that's allowed in NASP as well. Now we're going to inspect the arrows to make sure they're okay. Here we're going to check these arrows. These arrows are fine for use in the tournament. These arrows are also fine to be used in the tournament. But when we come to this quiver of arrows, we notice there are some problems in this quiver. Two of the arrows in this quiver look okay. The gold and the blue NASP arrows are fine. Here's another arrow that is the correct length, but it's made of carbon. So that arrow will have to come out of the quiver. Here's an arrow. While it's the correct length, the vanes are too long. They're much longer than the NASP vanes, so this arrow will come out of the quiver. It's obvious these last two arrows are far too short to be used in the program, so they're going to come out. They have other problems. Feathers are not allowed in the tournaments. And this arrow has, in addition to it being carbon and too short, it also has vanes that are too small. These vanes are too small for an arrow in NASP. So those arrows all come out for those reasons. These two arrows that are left are legal for use in the tournament. They're full length, which means they're 30 inches. The vanes are 2.8 inches, give or take a half an inch, and they're made of soft plastic. The shafts are aluminum. I can read on the shaft that it says Genesis 1820 and has the NASP logo, and I can see that they have target points. These are okay for use in the tournament. At some of our tournaments, arrows are provided by the tournament sponsor, and students may not bring their personal arrows, so it depends upon the tournament whether you'll be inspecting tournament arrows or personal arrows. This next video segment is going to be the safe operation of the range while the student archers compete. But before we can start blowing whistles and shooting arrows, we need to get scorecards down to the target butts. Go ahead and put your scorecards on your scoreboards. The lane official will make sure that scorecards are in place and that shooter numbers have been bubbled in on each scorecard. Otherwise, we won't know who shot that score. As a lane official, the first thing I do before we can begin operating the range is to make sure that all the archers' toes are completely behind the waiting line. When they are, I'll raise my hand so that the announcer can see that the range is ready, and he'll blow 2 whistles to get bow. Go ahead and walk, get your bow. I'm making sure that they're walking, and they're walking up to the 10-meter shooting line. They're going to straddle the shooting line, 1 foot on each side of the shooting line. You're going to walk with your bows up to the shooting line, straddle the shooting line with your bows right side up, and place the bow on your toe. Make sure the cam's down. There you go. The toe closest to the target. Now when you're in your lane, there must be 2 archers in your 5-foot wide lane. So make sure that you stay in your half of the lane, that 1 foot is on each side of the shooting line, and that the quiver is on the shooting line and directly in front of the archer. Each archer has their own quiver in front of them. Okay, we want to make sure 1 foot is on each side of the shooting line, so straddle the shooting line, there you go, and make sure your quiver is on the shooting line directly in front of you. That's it, perfect. The first end at 10 meters will be a practice end of 5 arrows. So when you hear the whistle to shoot, you'll shoot 5 arrows for practice. I see everybody's ready. I see bows on toes. The range is ready for the 1 whistle command. Shoot. As a lane official, I'm watching to make sure that the archers follow our protocols. Here we see a couple of archers with bows being knocked horizontal. They're going to bang and interfere with each other, so I want to make sure they hold those bows vertical. They're going to shoot their 5 practice arrows. They have 2 minutes to do that. If an arrow bounces off the target, we're going to give that archer another arrow immediately and let them shoot that arrow again. If an arrow's dropped, the archer will raise his hand. The lane official will bring him another arrow that is the same color as the one that he's shooting. He was shooting blue, so here's a blue. That dropped arrow will stay there for safety's sake until it's time to go get arrows from the target. Then it will be picked up. When the archers are finished shooting, they should clear the shooting line, re-rack their bows, and go back behind the waiting line. All toes are behind the waiting line. I can signal the range official to blow the signal to go get arrows. Okay, walk down. Remember, these arrows are unscored, so leave your scorecard alone. This is the target line, which is 6 feet or 2 yards from the targets. This is where one archer will wait while his lane mate pulls arrows from the target. This protects the waiting archer from the knock of the arrow poking them. So this is the target line which all archers will wait their turn so that there's only one archer pulling arrows from the target at a time. When 2 archers have shot the same target, one will wait behind the target line while the other archer pulls his arrows. When that archer's pulled his arrows, then the other archer can go to the target. This protects the waiting archer from the knock end of the arrow. 2 hands on the arrows, covering the points, another hand, and then walk back to the quivers, and then go behind the waiting line. That's a safe arrow carry. Make sure the points are completely covered by your hand. All toes are behind the waiting line. Signal the range official for the get bow signal. Get bow. Walk, please. Lane officials, you're making sure the students are walking again. They straddle the shooting line, bows on toes, toe nearest the targets, and that the quiver is directly in front of them on the shooting line. Once bows are on toes, I signal to the announcer that he can give the shoot signal. Shoot. Remember, they're keeping your bows vertical so as not to interfere with your lane mate. When you're finished shooting, re-rack your bow and go behind the waiting line. That's it. Go behind the waiting line. It's very important, lane officials, that the archers stay on their feet when they're at the targets so that their eyes and the rest of their body is more safe from the knock end of the arrow. So if you see them on their knees, you need to say, up on your feet, please, so they'll raise to their feet. When they're scoring their arrows on their scorecards, the scorecard, this is the 10-meter block, the top half of the scorecard. There's a scoring, there's a place to score end number 1, end number 2, and end number 3. Each end has five arrows shot. So they're going to be scoring end 3 now. Each line is 1 arrow. 0 through 10 points are what's possible on each end. If they make a mistake on the scorecard, notice the pencils are without erasers. They have to call for a lane official to come over and erase the mistake and then bubble in the correct value for the arrow score. The lane official will then sign the back of the card that they made that change, that erasure. When they're scoring the targets, these are 80-centimeter targets, and the rings, the values indicated on the ring, but the outside white is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the first yellow ring is 9, and then the entire center, even the little circle with the plus in it, that's a 10. If an arrow is touching a line, like this arrow is touching a line here, you give the archer the higher value. So this would be an 8 rather than a 7. Even if it were just barely touching, you would still get the higher value. It's important that the archers score all their arrows before the target or the arrows are touched. We're going to go get arrows. This was your last scoring end at 10 meters. All toes are behind the waiting line. Lane official will give a signal that we're ready to go get arrows. Walk again, please. Come on up to the target line and stop. Let me explain to the lane official volunteers what you're going to do now. You're going to stay on your feet, and then one of you is going to come up at a time, and you're going to give the scoreboard to your lane mate, and you're going to call your arrow while your lane mate records his arrow on the scorecard. And then we're going to reverse roles. So now you come on up and and give her the scoreboard. Show her which scorecard is yours. It's the red one. Okay, Ethan. Now, staying on your feet, call the arrow. Before you touch it, tell her what the value is. Make sure you agree with the value. An 8. Okay. Okay, and then she's bubbling in the 8. Tell her the next value. A 9. And one more arrow, or is that all? One more arrow. Oh, you need a line? Okay, well, that is an 8. It's touching the 8 ring, so it gives an 8 value. Now you can come on back. Switch roles, you take the board. You come up and call your arrows, and Ethan will record them. All right, now you're ready to put the board down and pull your arrows. Each of you pull your own arrows. If you're going to pull arrows first, Anna, Ethan will wait behind here. You go ahead and pull your arrows. Look back every time you pull. Make sure Ethan's safe. Lane official volunteers, you're making sure they stay on their feet, that the archer calls his or her arrows while the lane mate bubbles the score on the scorecard. Then they reverse roles. You call your own arrow, but your lane mate is the one that bubbles the scorecard. Now it's your turn. She's carrying her arrows, points covered, back to the quiver. Lane official volunteers, we pretend now we just shot 1 practice end and 3 scoring end at 10 meters. It's time now for the archers to pick up their quivers and take them to the second and furthest distance in NASP, which is the 15-meter shooting line. Make sure they have the quiver, they keep the quiver in the same lane that they've been shooting in. So archers, pick up your quivers, put them in the 15-meter lane, and then go behind the waiting line. Now we're ready to shoot the second half of a NASP tournament. All toes are behind the waiting lines. We'll get the signal to get bows. Get bows. Remember, walk again, straddle the shooting line, quiver in front of you. Bows on toes. Lane official, when you see that all the archers are straddling the line, 1 foot on each side of the shooting line, and that there's a quiver in front of each archer on the shooting line, and that bows are on toes, you can give the signal to the range announcer to give the shoot whistle command. Shoot. Lane official, again, you're making sure the students are not interfering with their lane mate, that they're not crowding their lane mate, that they stay in their half of the lane, that their bows are more or less vertical as they knock them so they're not banging their partner's bows. If an arrow is dropped on the floor, make sure that arrow stays on the floor and give that archer a replacement arrow. If the arrow bounces off the target, you'll give them another arrow so they can shoot that bounce out over during this end. When they're finished shooting, make sure that they re-rack their bow and they walk behind the waiting line. As soon as they're finished, they must clear the shooting line. When all toes are behind the waiting line, we're ready to go get arrows. Okay, it's walking, please. This is your last scoring end at 15 meters. Come on up and score the arrows by alternating. So the archer calls her own arrows while the lane mate bubbles the score. When you're finished calling all your arrows, you come up and verify that they were bubbled correctly. If they're correct, then you'll give a signal for your other archer to go up. When you finish pulling your arrows, you'll look over your scorecard, you'll sign your scorecard, your lane mate will sign your scorecard, and you'll do the same thing on the other scorecard. At all times, the scorecards must remain at the target butt. You can be disqualified if you take your scorecard back towards the shooting line. Now you've scored your last arrows, you've both confirmed your scorecards are accurate, you've signed your scorecard and your lane mate is signed as a witness. You've just completed your NASP competition at this tournament. You pick up your arrows. If they're your own arrows, you can leave the range with your arrows and your bow. If they're the tournament's arrows, please leave those arrows in the quiver. Thank you for joining us today in this competition and for being so safe. Lane official, you're going to stay back with the scorecards. You're going to pull the scorecards from the boards, make sure that they are signed and that you have shooter numbers on every card. Collect them all. And a range official will surely come shortly and take these from you. so that they can be scanned in the scanning room. This lane official is Patrick O'Connell, the coordinator of Kentucky NASP. During this last segment of the training video, Lane Volunteers, we want to talk about managing the archer or communicating with the archer. The number one complaint we get from our tournaments is from an archer or a coach who says that the lane official actually distracted or bothered or somehow disrupted that archer's performance. It's important to minimize your communication with and interaction with the archer themselves. If the archer is doing something that needs to be fixed, it's best to have the coach fix it because the coach knows how to talk to that individual archer. Now, if it's something simple like they're at the targets and they've gotten down on their knees, you need to say, please stand up, stay on your feet. That's okay. Or if they're carrying arrows with one hand instead of two, then you can say, please carry the arrow with two hands and the point's covered. That's okay to say those kinds of things to the archer. But if you've got an archer that is doing some things while they shoot, that's part of their form that need to be fixed because they're unsafe, talk to the coach about that and they will correct it. Now we're going to have Ethan here demonstrate one of the shooting issues that can occur, a high draw. We want to make sure the arrow point stays below the top of the curtain so that if it's released by accident, we don't go over the curtain and damage the building. So Ethan, you'll demonstrate a high draw and shot for us. Watch Ethan. He started out, the point of the arrow is above the target, and then he comes down. Had that arrow been released while the arrow was above the target, we would have damaged the facility. Now, that's part of Ethan's shooting form. It's best for me, instead of talking to Ethan about that, to go talk to the coach, say, hey, your archer on lane number 5 has a high draw. You need to get them to come to a pre-draw and stop before they draw. And then the coach will fix that. Another situation that can arise on the shooting line is an archer crowding the lane mate. Here you see two archers. One archer right here is trying to stand in the middle of the lane. This archer is standing in her half of the lane. So this one is crowding the other one. And so we need to get this archer to move back. The lane official can say, for the first time, say, you need to get in your half of the lane, so I need you to move back. And if she moves back, would you go ahead and move back a little bit? Give your archer, there you go. Now we have better spacing here. Now if it happens again, this archer really wants to be in the middle. It's time to go talk to the coach and have the coach fix that for us. Patrick O'Connell, you're the coordinator of NASP in Kentucky, and I appreciate you and your Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources for bringing the crew together and equipment together so that we can conduct this training video. Thank you, Patrick. And I want to thank Anna as well. You've come here to help us with these demonstrations. Tyler, you've been great too. Shelby, thank you for helping us with this video. And Ethan, thank you for shooting well and following all the safety protocols. We couldn't have done this video without you, and we can't do the tournaments without you either. So thank you. Lane official volunteers, you've now watched the training video that will help you be a better lane official at NASP tournaments, whether they're local, regional, state, national, or world events. You'll have a better time, and the archers will have a much better time participating in our tournaments now that you have mastered the skills necessary for being a tournament volunteer.